Welcome to the podcast, Creating Value in Travel and Transportation, hosted by Landry Holy, CEO and founder of Fairval. In this podcast channel, we will exchange with entrepreneurs, industry experts, financial institutions, and investors on how they contribute to creating value in various travel verticals, thanks new innovative tech solutions and financial services. So, if you have an interest in travel retailing, hospitality, urban mobility, maritime, aviation and space tech, then this podcast is for you.
Hello everyone and welcome to this podcast, Creating Value in Travel and Transportation. Today we have with us Jack Dow, founder and CEO of Grapevine, a Traveltech startup already well recognized within the travel industry. Grapevine was recently awarded by Focuswire amongst the 25 hot travel startup to watch out in 2023. Jack, hello. Glad to see you here.
Hey Landry, thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
Great. So maybe I'd like to start with one question, which is, what is Grapevine trying to solve as a problem, and what is the core value proposition of Grapevine after all?
Cool. So the core problem that Grapevine is trying to solve is that in travel at the moment, most agents and travel businesses are great at capturing inbound requests for bookings, but they're not so good after the initial point of sale to remarket to travelers after there. And because travel is, there's so many different aspects to travel, typically the flight is only the first part of a booking, or a hotel is only the first part of a booking. So if you compare that to e-commerce, where someone buys a shirt online, they'll have a series of follow-up messages designed to, tell them about the other products that the retailer has. In travel, people come to you, they book, and that's often the end of the journey. But it's only the beginning of the journey for the traveler. So, if they buy a flight, they've then got to get to the airport. So there's a taxi to the airport or airport parking, lounge access, fast track security, through to restaurants, live events, and more. And so we're trying to help travel businesses capture this revenue that typically should be theirs because they're the ones who have the customers.
Right. And so how do you achieve solving this problem through Grapevine, basically?
Yeah, so we're very data driven. So what we do as a business is I take a data feed from our clients. We're starting in the business travel space initially, but the technology is agnostic in reality. That's as much of a bandwidth challenge as anything else. But we take a data feed from customers, and from that data we identify what people have booked, and then importantly work out what they haven't yet booked. So in business travel, it's very typical that, almost 100% of their clients will book their flights through them. And so we get the data through that says that Landry has booked a flight to New York in maybe 2 or 3 weeks' time. And then we look at the data and see, okay, is it an overnight trip? Yes or no? If it is, then has Landry booked a hotel as well? And if you haven't booked a hotel, then there's an opportunity to sell a hotel or recommend a hotel to you with a view to hopefully you booking through them as well. So a lot of this is non-discretionary spend. Typically you have to stay somewhere when you're traveling overseas and you're staying overnight. You have to get to the airport somehow. So we're looking at the data, identifying those slots of opportunity, and then sending a white labeled recommendation, initially via email, but we'll be rolling out text and WhatsApp soon as well, to the traveler to remind them that the travel business is there to help them.
Yes, so that's quite interesting. But if I may, one of the questions that comes to mind is cross-sell has been something that we've seen around for some time. I mean, if you book on EasyJet or any airline, any online travel agencies, you always get some kind of cross-sell after your main booking. And I mean, what is so different from what we're experiencing today through Grapevine?
Yeah, so I think the low-cost carriers are probably the best at doing this in the industry. But the amazing thing is how unpersonalized sort of most of this cross-sell is. And really today's customer is expecting a really personalized experience. I was speaking to someone the other day who actually did a day trip to, I think it was Zurich from London, there and back on the same day. And the airline they were traveling with sent them an email saying, "Hey, do you need a hotel?" And they'd booked a return sort of there and back on the day. So it was a really interesting insight to the level of personalization and the sort of, I suppose, lack of data that's being used to make these recommendations. Similarly, one of my team was coming over from Hungary about this time last year or late last year, and they got a flight via one of the largest OTAs in the world. They booked a flight from London, from Budapest to London, and it was they landed at London Luton, which is probably 20 miles north of London, and then they left from London Stansted, which is probably about 25 miles northeast of London. And they got a recommendation the next day saying, "Hey, would you like a hotel? Here's some suggestions." And one was a Heathrow Airport hotel, and one was a Gatwick Airport hotel. So they're probably the two places this person is least likely to stay on their trip to London. And so the difference is we are really taking a lot of time to understand who the traveler is and understand the context of a recommendation. So we're kind of, the opposite to a kind of a spammy or, indiscriminate sort of, email, just hoping, hit and hope, as it were. We're really working out who the customer is, what kind of product they might want, and then we're personalizing it. So we look at historical data of the traveler, and sort of see where they've stayed before for hotels, where their colleagues have stayed. We're using things like collaborative filtering, content filtering, to work out what are the attributes of a hotel that make sense to them, where are the locations within a destination that make sense to them, and we're feeding that all into our recommendations engine. So much more personalized, much more contextual, and really focused on delivering value to the end user rather than just sending anything to them and hoping it sticks.
All right. So you've been mentioning business travel. Can you elaborate a bit more? Who are your customers?
Yeah, so our route to market is through corporate travel agents, so travel management companies, or TMCs as they're known in the industry. And we initially spoke to various verticals within travel. We were speaking to hotel groups, we're speaking to some airlines, and we decided to go down the business travel route for a few reasons. One of them being in business travel is high frequency of travel. Another one was, I think, the size of the management sort of teams within corporate travel agents are much smaller typically, and so being able to get to the decision makers can be easier. Doesn't mean it's easy, but it can be easier than in other businesses. Hotel groups, for example, are highly fragmented, and even if you get to the decision makers, they might have franchise models. That means rolling out the technology across their portfolio might be difficult. And so high frequency of travel, access to management teams, known traveler intent. People are going for a business trip, which helps with your kind of initial personalization when you don't know a huge amount of things about people. You've also got a natural cohort amongst business, your colleagues in business travel. So if you haven't stayed somewhere before, if a few of your colleagues have, that can be an indicator of a good place to recommend hotel-wise. And generally, we thought it was a good place to start. And the final one was that you're also mandated often by your corporate to book through the sort of travel agent. So in leisure, there's no real, emphasis, or there's no one pressuring you to book through a certain channel. Whereas in business travel, due to duty of care, and things like that, actually they are employee productivity, etc. They are keen for you to book through the channel. So we saw that as a good opportunity.
Right, and so that means that you're focusing more on what we call manage business travel. So manage business travelers, basically. So they have a corporate travel agency behind managing the trip. Is that going to be the only core, only quoted, or are you looking at maybe the unmanaged segment at some stage?
Yeah, so no, the managed business travel is very much our route to market. As I mentioned earlier on, we are ultimately agnostic to the technologies or the partners that we work with. The key for us is is being able to get the data in a structured way that we can identify where those opportunities are. And we've worked very hard to get our core, our core ability, our core engine's ability to take data, identify, sort of normalize it, so we can take it from multiple sources, then normalize it into a format that sort of we can then generate these recommendations with and see insights, etc., and then send messages. And so, starting with business travel, as I mentioned, for all those reasons before, but there's talked to multiple people about the opportunity for online travel agents, airlines, cruise lines or hotel groups is very much there. And actually, we can go beyond there. So obviously, there's a lot of fintechs out there that are trying to build these super apps. And if we've got the data, we can see, where people have booked, or if people have booked, and then when they've landed places. So whether it be Monzo, Revolut, hey, you've just landed in Stockholm. We know you love sushi and craft beer. Here's some good suggestions for you. Or, what are you doing tonight? We've seen that your favorite band's playing in concert. So there's no limit to who we can work with. And actually, it transcends travel or goes beyond travel as well.
Right. Because, I was asking about the unmanaged travel segment because it's quite a big segment. It's actually, there's more unmanaged travelers than managed travelers. And what you just say is interesting. So if you were going through those fintech apps or an airline.com, would that be a way to tap on this unmanaged segment, business travel segment, actually?
Yeah, absolutely. So, there's in terms of business travel and the unmanaged component, I think the unmanaged component is about 60% of business travel. So $1.4 trillion industry, about 40% of which is managed. So managed by, I think there's about 23,000 TMCs globally. Obviously, there's it's quite concentrated at the sort of at the top with, the big global TMCs, and then really our core target market is the sort of the next layer, which is a mid-tier, and then there's a very long tail. But actually, there's a huge sort of opportunity with the unmanaged travel. So, independent travelers or smaller businesses that haven't yet don't yet require kind of a managed sort of program. But yeah, we'd probably get through to them either via corporates or via airlines and hotel or OTAs and things like that. That provides much more of a one-to-many approach that suits us a bit better.
Right. So we're in a podcast which is about creating value in travel and transportation. Can you be a bit explicit how you actually create value to the corporate travel agency or the TMCs?
Yeah. So I actually see us creating value across three stakeholders within business travel: the traveler first and foremost, the corporate, and the TMC as well. In reverse order, there's a huge amount of leakage within business travel at the moment. I think the average attach rate of a hotel to an overnight flight booking is between 20 and 30%. So 70 to 80% of hotels' sort of leakage in the industry is a huge opportunity to be tackled initially. So, we're focusing on that, which obviously drives revenue to the TMC. So, various partners of ours have been very specific around identifying, what Grapevine provides is the ability to maximize revenue per trip. And we're confident over the next few years, we can actually increase revenue per trip by about 35%, but profit per trip by over 120%. And that's because, for almost no cost at all, we can start accessing new ancillary revenue streams that have high margins. And you actually need to get a small percentage of conversions for those to start adding up. So if you think about the journey, it starts with a flight. There's then flight booking. There's then the taxi to the airport. There's the fast track security lounge access at the airport. There's various sort of other upsell opportunities there. Taxi to the hotel at the other side, potential for upgrades at the hotel, and then in destination spend, and then a taxi back to the airport, and then to home again. So multiple opportunities, and that's just that's just the sort of the icing on the cake. Really, there's a whole bunch of other opportunities that are there. So that drives revenue to the TMC. What we're then seeing is driving value to the corporate because their employees are booking in platform. And from a duty of care perspective, if if people fly to New York and something, there's a terrorist attack in New York, and people don't know where their employees are because they've booked their hotel on a different platform, that creates a big duty of care issue for the corporate. So they're incentivized to, or they're really looking for people to make bookings in platform, from a duty of care perspective, but also from a productivity and an expense management perspective as well. By us sort of delivering value to the traveler, actually, and they then don't have to go and look for all of these other things. So it increases their productivity, and sort of then everything's booked in the same place as well. So expense management wise, it helps. And then finally, and sort of obviously last but not least, and the ultimate recipient of the value is the traveler. And I think travelers have been neglected for a long time. I think the consumer kind of journeys have improved a lot over the last few years. Obviously, the kind of booking.coms of the world have set the new benchmark in terms of user experience, and Expedia. But what we're trying to do is provide that consumer grade experience in a business context. So, and really just, as I mentioned earlier, the key for us is context and providing value. We're not looking to spam people with kind of a bunch of messages and try and upsell them. We dig deep into what drives value to the traveler in terms of how we can help them. And if we deliver value, that will have the flow-on effect into other sides of the business. But really, when do you book your hotel? Do you book your hotel, if you book your flight 3 weeks before, do you book your hotel the next few days? Or are you someone who's always going to leave it to the last minute? And in which case, then don't bother sending you a hotel recommendation till a few days before. Do you like to have everything organized early, like sort of taxis or airport parking, all of that kind of stuff? And do you respond better to an email for that content, or as a text or a WhatsApp? And that might be trigger based, or alert based. So, hey, your plane's just been delayed. Would you like lounge access? Or, hey, we've just seen queues along at the airport. Would you like fast track security? So these are all things that, help mitigate sort of travel risk for the traveler, and hopefully provide a great experience to them. And then what that does is it then helps build trust, that the TMC is serving them from the minute they book their flight to the moment they get home. And so we're just really trying to sort of fill that gap for stuff that they might have booked otherwise, but drive value to them as well.
That's very interesting. I remember when I was working in some big corporation, we were using those self-booking tools, and or sometimes the travel agency was booking for us a hotel, and they would book a hotel like miles away where we needed to be, or the worst place. Really not convenient. And you had 6 hours of flight, and you end up in some kind of no man's land hotel. And that's quite a bit crazy. So, but that was due to the fact that there was those corporate policy embedded in the system. So how do you go about that conflict between those corporate policy, or do you believe that actually corporations are starting to see business travel differently for their employees?
Yeah, so this was my experience as a business traveler as well. Prior to starting Grapevine, is I lived in Sydney. I do a lot of travel within Australia primarily, but it was amazing how, and I was quite a good corporate citizen, so I would probably often stay at the hotel I was told to stay at. Whereas I think today's traveler now questions it a lot more. Why do I have to stay here? And I think they are, there's a lot of research sort of pre-COVID about how, and I think this has continued certainly sort of since COVID, in terms of almost been sort of increased, because people now are desperate to travel again and get out and about, having been sort of held at home for so long. But the young sort of millennial, Gen Z, I don't know what we're at today, but they, it's well documented that they're very well-being focused. They're very sort of experiential focused. And so actually staying in the right place for them is much more important. And if they're going somewhere, to be able to experience that city or destination. And so I don't see it as nothing's going to change overnight, but I think historically, travel management or sort of buyers have been, or hotel programs have often been run by procurement teams whose number one focus is on sort of minimizing costs, and that's their KPIs, reduce costs where they can. And I think, what we're hoping to do over the next few years is provide a feedback loop around why people might be not booking through them. Is it just timing? Is it the what's in there? They don't like what's in the program? Is the content that they're being offered not as good as what they might expect? Do they want more flexibility or whatever it is? And to be able to provide that in a more holistic context that says, hey, by giving people more flexibility, whether it's better content, better user experience, whatever it is, or, more choice, the cost of that trip might be a little bit more, or they might stay in an area that seems, to be outside of the zone of where you might stay. But actually, by giving the travelers that kind of flexibility and opportunity, they actually become a much more sticky employee who enjoys traveling for the business and, likes sort of going away and things like that. And so actually the attrition costs of them potentially leaving because they find they've got to travel a lot and and actually it sort of grinds them down. If you can add those layers of value to them, actually they then become a more sort of loyal and sticky employee. So I don't see this kind of thing happening overnight, but I do think that with a renewed focus on, or not even renewed, probably a new focus on employee well-being and things like that, I see that there's an opportunity to provide a bit of a feedback loop to both TMCs but to businesses as well, to help them understand the traveler and see those things and help shape travel policy and programs around that kind of thing.
And would you see your solution actually also being a feedback loop, for anything around sustainability reporting? Because that's now, a lot of corporations, they're trying to have their index, in sustainability higher than what they are, achieving today. So how do you see your role here?
So yeah, it's a really interesting point, and it's something that's at the sort of forefront of our agenda. And actually, I'd actually argue that it's the younger traveller that's driving a lot of this as well. So, this isn't one of those policies that is necessarily corporate driven. I think corporates are doing a good job in raising the profile. There was a McKinsey report that was shown at GPTA last year that said that travel buyers were putting sustainability was the number one thing that they wanted to see, or enhancements to sustainability was one of the number one things they wanted to see from their TMCs, sort of 2023 onwards, and so we've actually got a product called Grapevine Premium, which is sort of which allows us to layer in sort of the carbon footprint of a trip into that. So working closely with a great business called Thrust Carbon to get that data. And whilst we're typically triggered by a flight sort of being booked, so we're after the fact, actually we designed it in collaboration with various corporates and buyers. And actually one of the things they said is it's like visual guilt. It's reminding the traveler that sort of, there is an environmental cost to the trip. And so reminding them and just sort of trying to reinforce that kind of mentality around here is the impact of your trip, which I think is super important. So typically at the moment we're a kind of post flight booking, but I think by reinforcing that, information sort of in the data and helping people think about it, I think we can play a big part in driving sustainability.
Yeah, and I think you could push the right hotels which are playing the game actually, which is or any transfer which is maybe using electric cars rather than a big pickup.
Yeah,
when you arrive
absolutely.
in the States, sometimes you have a huge pickup coming, and you're like, okay, that doesn't seem right.
Yeah,
If I'm
no,
against.
100%. And we're, again, sort of our goal is to work with best-in-class suppliers. So as I mentioned, Thrust Carbon, Journey on the ground transportation side, people who can deliver that sort of those green options that, not only provide the optionality there, but are reminding people that sort of those are options. which is super important in this day and age. So, hotels, I know a lot of the suppliers are sort of feeding that data into there as well. And I think we're on a really, good path in terms of that becoming part of people's decision making. And, I think what we have to also consider is, A, are the suppliers providing it, but B, are corporates, factoring in that into their sort of budgets and things like that as well. And if it is a bit more, can people offset and things like that? So I don't think there's one player in that kind of journey who's going to own it all. I think it is sort of the contribution of all the players in that journey that will make a big difference.
So we're talking about conceptual things, and I like numbers. Because if I relate to some of the startup we work with, some of them are in the AI space, and they try to have the wider market, so they're cross industry, whereas Grapevine is like travel vertical, and even further corporate travel agencies. It seems like you're very focused, which is excellent for startup. But on the other side, it looks like you're on a niche, a very, niche. So
it's a very small $1.4 trillion niche that we're focused on. So, it is and this is one of the, I think, misconceptions with travel is that you kind of, I think travel in total is broadly a $10 trillion industry. Business travel is 1.4 trillion. As I mentioned, I think 40% odd of that is managed. And it is critical, I think, for a startup to be really focused in the early stages. And you wouldn't believe how many nuances there are even within that sort of in that niche. And so we're very focused on business travel. We've got a really sort of strong pipeline of corporate travel agents. We've got some preferred partnership agreements in place with some large consortiums. So the Advantage Travel Partnership in the UK and Hickory Global Partners we've just signed with in the US. And we've also got some great integration partners that allow us, one of our strategies is to be able to plug and play. So the ability to roll new clients out very easily. Travel technology has historically been, a costly and time-consuming exercise, but we're a very lightweight structure. And because we don't have to deal with flights, we're able to plug into businesses, take their data, and then roll out this technology very quickly with a goal to actually being able to onboard people in under a week with less than 3 hours of their time. So very kind of lightweight and efficient, starting with business travel and then the ability to roll out into other niches. And we've already generated over $1 million in incremental hotel bookings with some of our launch clients. So a really exciting start.
That's interesting what you said. And it's true that you mentioned about the value you bring to corporate travel agencies, but you also mentioned that you get the feed of, the trip details of a business travel. So you seem to be like a very some kind of marketing channel with very well qualified audience, if you speak in those terms. So I would say that you not only bring value to the corporate travel agency, but actually you bring value to the suppliers, the distributors of supplies, like the bed banks, you name it, booking.com, but as well even the traditional players like the GDS, Global Distribution System, like Sabre, Amadeus, Travelport. What's your take? How do you see yourself in that respect? And have you had some discussion with those players? Do they recognize your role as such?
Yeah, absolutely. We're in a really unique position where we're kind of creating wins for everyone we work with. It's a kind of with the TMCs, the suppliers, and us. It's a win-win-win. And our revenue model is a revenue share primarily. It's a subscription and hybrid subscription and revenue share model. So we're completely aligned with our clients in terms of trying to drive revenue, but also with the suppliers in that we drive more to them. So, the interesting thing about business travel is if someone doesn't book through their TMC, then they're not they're not going off to another TMC to book. They're going direct to another channel, either
Yeah.
direct to a hotel or direct to sort of a Booking or Expedia or something like that. So we are keeping people within the ecosystem, and they certainly wouldn't be booking through the GDS. And so no, we've got a great partnership with most of the GDSs. We were invited into the Amadeus Startup Universe. We've got several clients live with Travelport, who've been a great supporter of ours, and looking to work with Sabre quite soon as well. Because the reality is, if there is 70 to 80% leakage in hotel bookings, and we can drive people back to them, and even Booking and Expedia recognize that sort of, people have got multiple places to go, including direct if they don't go through the TMC. So, no, we've been very lucky in that most of these suppliers are keen to work with us, which is quite unusual in the travel space for startups. It can be often quite a high barrier to entry, but because of our unique business model, we've been very fortunate that a lot of these guys are keen to work with us and drive value to them. It's not just it might be slightly selfish as well, because they're keen to drive revenue for themselves, but it's a win-win.
Okay, that's very interesting. Can you share some KPIs, performance you've achieved? Because actually, what I understand, so you identify an opportunity, so you send a message or an email at the right moment. I mean, what's your performance there? I mean, how successful are you to convert in bookings, basically?
Yeah, so we're getting on average about a 55% open rate on emails, and about a 12% open to convert rate. So industry benchmark wise, that sort of blows most sort of industries sort of out of the water. But for us, this is really the low hanging fruit. Then we're sort of, or not necessarily low hanging fruit, but more kind of our initial sort of start in the market. We're now starting to build the team out so that we can have real deep dive into the data. We can live and breathe the messages that are going out to people, A/B testing, and really that's what sort of people are doing when they hire us, is they're hiring that data and marketing expertise, and that provides sort of a feedback loop. And back to your sort of point about around the data, we see that bit as being a really valuable opportunity to feed back to our customers as well, to really show them the insights from that data, not just sort of as a not just in terms of our performance, but also showing them areas where they can potentially sort of enhance their performance as well prior to getting to us. So, which may cannibalize, if they sell better before they get to us, that sort of may cannibalize our offering to a degree, but actually we're all about creating a long-term partnership and value for our customers.
Right. I was trying to kind of compare yourself with more traditional players in other industries, and it came across that you were doing something very similar to a company called Klaviyo, which had a huge success. I don't recall exactly the figures. If I can find them, happy to share them now. But anyway, would you confirm that you are kind of the Klaviyo of the travel?
Yeah, so we know Travel well, huge admirer of theirs, and what they have done to Klaviyo and Ametria. What they've done is they recognize in the e-commerce space that once people come to the business, that's just the beginning of the journey. There's the opportunity to remarket to them after that. And so I think, Klaviyo, have raised about $750 million. I think they're valued at $9 billion now. And both of those platforms are what they call, I think, is a CDMP, customer data and marketing platform. And so what they've both done very well is they sit on top of Shopify stores or WooCommerce or Squarespace, and they provide e-commerce retailers with the ability to easily send follow-up messages based on sort of rules and logic, and starting to add some AI in there as well. Which is amazing. And the rule of thumb now in e-commerce is if you're not driving 25 to 30% of your revenue through remarketing, then you're leaving money on the table. So that's certainly an inspiration. The challenge with travel is as opposed to e-commerce and retail where you buy a nice shirt, therefore after you've bought it, they've got your email address, so they can send you a series of follow-up messages ultimately into perpetuity. So here you bought this shirt, you might like these jeans, you might like these trainers, etc., etc. There's no, real end to that unless the person unsubscribes. Whereas in travel, your trip is finite. So, and I heard a good terminology the other day, someone describing it as perishable. So you've got a trip, say to Berlin in 2 weeks' time. You bought your flight, and then you've got sort of ultimately 2 weeks, and then however long the trip is to upsell or cross-sell opportunities, and then once the trip is done, it's finished. You can't sort of, market to them anymore, or marketing is maybe not the right sort of term because it can be, it's more service-based, particularly in the business travel side of things. And so you are, it's a reducing sort of, it's a timeline that's getting shorter and shorter, but also the content is changing every day. Availability changes every day. Prices changes every day. So it's a lot more complex data wise. And then you've got the kind of inconsistencies and the fragmentation of data or technology stacks and things like that. And so, there isn't kind of, in travel, you may say that the GDSs are, albeit there's challenges with the GDSs because people book off platform and we need all the data. But there's less of a standardization of platforms like a Shopify that you get in sort of e-commerce. So that's a lot of the work that we did last year when COVID was, still sort of prevalent, and we were, it was a struggle to really double down on sales because everyone was struggling for survival. So we worked hard to get a lot of those integrations in place, which has served us well since then, because it means that sort of once we've got some of those integrations in place, we can then roll out very easily to new customers. And then the other difference with Klaviyo is that they are effectively providing people with a suite of tools to send these follow-up messages. So there's still essentially an onus on the travel company or the retailer to then construct these emails, and often they bring in experts to do that. Whereas we're actually doing that all. So we're kind of a bit more vertically integrated in that we send the messages on their behalf. They can still configure it how they want to, but we remove the hassle of them having to, have a marketing expert there to do that. So hopefully it's something that resonates well.
Right, that's quite interesting to see. So travel is complex, and no wonder Amazon is not in travel. Actually, I mean, we've been always expecting Amazon to jump onto the travel vertical, but I know they've done some attempts, but they've never gone there, and it's probably partly due to the complexity. So if it's complex, how complex is it for a corporate travel agency to onboard with Grapevine? Because if everything is complex, how easy is it with Grapevine? How much time do you take to onboard?
So what we've done is try to absorb the complexity ourselves. So as just mentioned, we've integrated with various mid-back office and reporting tools and things like that allows us to, once we've done those integrations, and that means we can then normalize the content and then we can deliver our service. And so an initial from a sort of strategically, we're trying to work with more of those customers so that we can get up and running. And our two sort of KPIs or a business are one, to prove that we can scale, which I think we're showing some good success with so far, and secondly, to demonstrate sort of conversion outperformance. And so by getting those data integrations in place, as I mentioned earlier on, our goal is to be able to onboard new customers sort of within a week with less than 3 hours of their time. So it is very complex, but that's a lot of the heavy lifting that we've done in the background. And our objective is to really kind of take that complexity away from people, and being the sort of, lightweight structure that we are, we're able to do that. Now, over time, we can provide more integrations and things like that, and SDKs and things that allow people to embed it into their own apps and things like that. But we're seeing that our white label technology is being really well received, which is great.
Right. So it's interesting when you talk about business scalability. So that now I would put my hat of as an investor. So I would ask you, Jack, I mean, how are you going to create value to your shareholders, your existing shareholders and future shareholders? Since now you tend to crack the business scalability, can you share a bit some numbers, some highlights you have in mind for the future?
Yeah, so we believe we can be $100 million revenue business within business travel alone, and that's with relatively conservative estimates, and also estimates of conversion sort of rates, but also of the number of clients that we onboard. The goal is to do that within the next 5 years, and that's in business travel alone. As mentioned, this technology is completely scalable across sort of different verticals within travel and beyond into fintech and things like that. So we've got a really clear route to market. We've got a great pipeline. We are ultimately building the team now. We're raising a seed round, and we're ultimately building the team now to be able to deliver on that. And the foundations that we've got in place are, we're absolutely on track to where we want to be. And I think through various of these sort of consortium partnerships that we've got and other sort of, the traction that we're getting, I think we've got a really great opportunity to capture significant market share in the UK and the US first, and then globally after that.
Right. So again, with the investor hat, I'm still kind of would challenge you on the business travel and the corporate travel agency market, because business travel since the COVID pandemic has gone down to some extent, and on the other side, I mean, we've been saying for years and years that travel agencies, this is not the future. I mean, everything is going online. So what's your view? I mean, are you betting on the right horse? If I'm an investor, am I really going to get, the return I'm expecting?
Yeah, so I think a couple of statistics on business travel that I think are interesting. Firstly, I think we're at about 70-80% of 2019 volumes at the moment, sort of business travel wise. So certainly getting back there. But interesting, last year, actually, the majority of TMCs actually generated more revenue than they did in 2019. And
Right.
that's helped by inflation primarily, in terms of cost of flights, hotels, etc. So revenue wise, these guys are doing as well, which is good for us as well. Importantly, we're not coming off the back of 2007 when, prior to 2007, 2008, there was a lot of exuberance in business travel. Everyone was traveling around the world in business class, and I've got a vision of people popping champagne in first class of all these airlines. But the reality is, in 2007, a lot of businesses cut back quite significantly on business travel and put in rules such as, if you're not flying over 6 hours and you're part of the C-suite, then you're not flying business class anymore. So one of the reasons we exist, or the opportunity we have exists, is because a lot of agents lost a lot of money or reduced their sort of revenue because the volume of business sort of class travel actually reduced quite a lot. But actually, in the same time as we got to 2010, 11, 12, there was a lot of research done and sort of up to today or pre-pandemic, where there was a lot of research done around the ROI of a business trip, and having stopped business travel, and I certainly had this, our bosses, when I was living in Australia, effectively stopped business travel, and it decimated your kind of, the sales and the opportunities that were kind of being found through traveling. And so a lot of, research was done, and they saw that the ROI on a business trip was, I think, at least $12 for every dollar spent on business travel. So it's well documented, and businesses know that they need to travel, to survive as businesses, because I think the old adage is the first time you lose a sale because your competitor was there and you weren't, is the last time you won't do that. And there's a lot to be said about Zoom and things like that. But actually, someone said to me a really interesting point the other day, is that actually a lot of what Zoom is replacing is what would have been done on the call anyway. So I don't think every Zoom call is what would have been an external meeting.
Mm.
Actually, a large percentage of Zoom calls are stuff that you just would have phoned, and now you can see people, which is good. But the reality is to sort of build relationships and to whether internally or externally, I think in-person meetings are super important. Something that came out last year, during COVID, a lot of businesses came out, particularly from a sustainability perspective. And there's always a bit of a link between new initiatives and sort of budgets. And they said, hey, we are going to limit internal travel because, we've got Zoom and we don't need to do things. But then about a year ago, a lot of large organizations realized that if there was no internal travel and people didn't go out to meet their kind of their teams and their subordinates and things like that, then culture would be lost. And so, there's a huge recognition that actually, you need people to be sort of meeting people in person to build culture because, there's the whole, the great sort of resign and things like that. A lot of younger people had started to, just go, I'm not that engaged with my business. And so to build up that culture, you need to actually sort of have a culture that people want to come to and they want to do things. So that's I suppose my overall view. I think the projections are now that 2024 will get back sort of in terms of volume of trips. And I think it was between 4 and 6% annual compounded growth prior to COVID in terms of business travel. So I think 2024 we should be back at where we were before and then sort of growing from there. The second part of that question was around the technology and do we need sort of travel agents to exist? And there's a couple of angles there. I think first and foremost, the pandemic reinforced the value proposition of corporate travel sort of agents, and I think sort of certainly leisure OTAs and travel agents of the last sort of 12 months of particularly have gone bananas. And I think what that shows is a couple of things. So the part of the pandemic reinforcing the value proposition was that travel disruption needs experts. And I think we are 10, 15, maybe 20 years off kind of, people really getting that kind of service from an AI or whatever it is in terms of actually mitigating the sort of travel risk, because so much of it comes down to the infrastructure that travel is built on. And, ultimately you need people because it's so complex in the background. It's 40-year-old legacy technology that it's a lot of systems are out there making it easier to book. It's the unpicking of that booking that's very complex to do. So that still relies on, and probably at least 10 years plus of it relying on that legacy technology. Do I think the requirement for, I think AI will start to play a part in some, various areas of travel. And certainly we're looking to sort of, layer in increasing sort of levels of NA of what we're doing. But ultimately, there's so much around business travel that requires, external support. It's not just booking, it's expense management, it's policy, and, ensuring policies are adhered to, it's duty of care, it's disruption management. And that is just simply stuff that, requires, boots on the ground for people to deliver. And so I think for the next, foreseeable future, I think there's going to be a huge need. And even, when that starts to sort of, reduce, our technology will still be very much required for people to remarket to people and things like that. So I think we're in a good spot.
And so I'm going to ask the question. So are you a fan of ChatGPT for your solution, or also as a companion to your solution and corporate travel agencies?
I think the potential with it is huge. I mean, obviously, we've seen various areas. For me, the biggest short-term potential is more around process automation and things like, testing code and being a companion to developers, and suddenly, businesses that might have needed 300 developers before might only need 30 because you're effectively 10xing the capabilities of people. Where it becomes interesting is I think you need talented people to be able to do that. I don't think, because it all comes down to making sure you're going in the right direction. Anyone can go and go crazy with ChatGPT, but if you're asking the wrong question in the first sort of instance, then you're going to come out with the wrong answer. And so there's an interest, and then where does that leave junior developers and things like that as that sort of changes? But training will become different. I think where I'm most excited about it is the sort of how it sits upon layers of data and things like that, and where I see actually reinforcing businesses like Grapevine or other businesses that are really in that kind of infrastructure layer in terms of taking data, processing bookings, feeding that back into systems, allowing that to form part of the kind of same system of record. That's where the real opportunities for businesses that are working on that layer, because the ChatGPT layer is going to become a commodity that anyone can, there's a million models that people will be able to use, but it's actually the ability to embed that sort of functionality into a really robust sort of plumbing that sort of is best positioned to leverage that technology. So I think I see it as a companion. I think there's a huge amount of opportunity. I think it seems to change every day, so it's a great one to follow. But actually, it puts an onus on finding solutions that create that sort of architecture and plumbing that other things can be layered on top of. So
yeah, definitely. And actually, there's a new type of job which is called prompt engineer, which is before you would be a SEO specialist on the Google search engine, but now it's being a prompt engineer. So that's quite interesting. We're reaching the end of this podcast, and I just wanted to finish off if you have any highlights you wanted to share with us before we close this session.
So I've mentioned a couple of the highlights so far. We're excited to have hit $1 million in incremental hotel bookings, and continually signing up great new partners, which we're excited about. We're hiring at the moment. So if anyone's looking to join an exciting new business in the travel space, we'd love to hear from you. And also doing, as I mentioned, a fundraise. So if it's of interest to any of the listeners, would welcome a discussion.
Great. Well, thank you, Jack, for your time. It's been a fascinating journey. I wish you all the best. And I think that Grapevine has a really bright future. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. Cheers.
Cheers. Bye.
Thank you for watching or listening to the podcast, Creating Value in Travel and Transportation, from Fairval. If you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to it. We welcome your support, feedback, and suggestions, and we hope to see you at the next podcast. Fairval, Creating Value in Travel and Transportation.